Investors are hopeful the UK will remain in the European Union, but the polls right now are neck and neck. Here to help us make sense of what the global economy would look like if a Brexit occurred is Sebastian Mallaby, a senior fellow for international economics at the Council on Foreign Relations. So, Sebastian, this is yet another one of these market event risks that we're watching, and everyone's wondering what's going to happen if the UK does indeed leave the EU. So why don't you give us a sense of what we might see following a Brexit, should that occur in that referendum on Thursday?
Well, if it does occur on Thursday, which I think is probably a 1 out of 3 chance, then I think one can say with some confidence that the amount of uncertainty unleashed would be really, really bad, both for the UK economy and with some ripple effects into Europe. The reason I say that is that there would be a constitutional crisis, first of all, because the status of Scotland inside the UK would be uncertain. The status of Ireland's peace process would be uncertain because that's premised on an open border between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, and in a Brexit scenario, that would be a hardened border between the EU and the non-EU. There would be legal uncertainty because a lot of domestic UK law derives from European law and would have to be rewritten. There would be enormous commercial uncertainty because Britain's trade relations with the rest of the European Union account for almost half exports. And when you've decided to rip up the rules governing those exports,
right.
Obviously there's big uncertainty.
All right, what do you make of remarks from billionaire investor George Soros saying that the pound would sink more than it did back in 1992 when Britain exited the European exchange rate mechanism? You want to unpack this for us a little bit?
Sure. I mean, George Soros famously made $1 billion as the man who broke the Bank of England with his trade in 1992. At that time, Britain was it was in a sort of exchange rate mechanism, not a peg, but a sort of band. And it broke out of that band, and there was a devaluation of around that time, 15%, because Soros and other speculators were betting on the decline and creating this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. Now Soros is saying that there would be something perhaps worse than that on a Black Friday following this Thursday's vote if it goes towards leaving the EU. And I think that's plausible. And Soros in his article today points out a few reasons why Britain is more vulnerable now than it was then. It has a bigger current account deficit as a share of GDP, meaning that it's more dependent on foreign capital inflows. If those suddenly stop, sterling is going to collapse. There is less scope for the Bank of England to counter currency weakness or economic decline by cutting interest rates because you're already near the zero lower bound, and UK banks would be undermined. So there's a bunch of reasons why this could actually be worse than last time.
All right, now bring this back to the US. Aside from some short-term swings in our markets, perhaps, what could be the fallout that the US would notice following a Brexit? And we just had Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen say it's hard to know how the US would be affected.
Right. Well, I think, the first order effect outside Britain would be in Europe. There would be a sell-off of peripheral bonds. We've seen that a bit already last week, where investors get scared that the glue holding Europe together is weakening, and therefore that a country like Spain, which people felt better about, since the euro crisis subsided, that risk perception will go up. So now you've got a weaker Europe, as well as a much, much weaker Britain. Does that have an effect on the US? It's not catastrophic, but I think you would feel something in terms of diminished export performance from the US into Europe, a stronger dollar as the euro would be weaker and sterling would be much weaker, and that would be bad for US producers if the dollar strengthened further. But I think actually just the biggest effect on the US would actually be political more than economic. The key ally in a complicated world, which remains Western Europe because of shared values with the US, would be tipped further into a kind of navel-gazing, introverted frame of mind.
All right, well, we'll be watching how this plays out. That Brexit referendum is on Thursday. All right, Sebastian Mallaby from the Council on Foreign Relations. Sebastian, thanks for your time.
Sure, good to be with you.
I'm Scott Gamm, and you're watching The Street.